I'm sure that on some level, Kira probably knows that what he's doing is evil. But he'll try to change the world even as a martyr, at the cost of his soul. That's his brand of justice. Anyway, we shouldn't be arguing about it. Good or evil, it's not our call. All we have to think about is catching him. If Kira gets caught, then that makes him evil. But if he wins and rules the world, then I guess he's justice.
Isn't it strange that Light Yagami refers to justice as if it's something that you can become or transform into? I suppose that this idea isn't all that foreign, as there are plenty of characters in fiction and in real life who strive to make it their mission to embody an ideal. But here it feels a bit different, doesn't it? The way Light mentions justice makes it seem more like it's something that can be taken and bent to your will, rather than an ideal to embody. This is compounded by the fact that Light also proposes that justice depends on winning a game. A very serious game with their lives at the stake, but still in its essence, a game. In this instance, Light and his crew will be justice if they catch Kira, or in Light's case, since he is secretly Kira, it will be defeating the police crew and stopping Nier and the SBK organization. Doesn't it seem a little ridiculous for Light to place the definition of who or what is justice on the outcome of a competition? But before I continue any further, I need to provide a quick synopsis to those who aren't familiar with Death Note or haven't seen it in a while, which I'll make quick and spoiler-free, relatively. Boiled down to its essentials, the story of Death Note is about a young boy who finds a book that kills anybody with their name written in it. That is the Death Note. There is a bunch of rules as to how it works, but essentially it was dropped to the human world from the Shinigami realm by a Shinigami, or a death god, named Ryuk. Light uses the book to kill off all of the world's major criminals in order to create a perfect world. Or at least perfect according to him. Then the police and international detectives like L and Nier get involved to stop the killings, and that's the main conflict and drama within Death Note. Light and L playing a dangerous game of wits in order to outsmart the other into revealing their true identity. There, done. Now, perhaps I can provide some clarity behind Light's reasoning on how justice can be dependent on the results of a game. It may be to the surprise of some that the ideas of justice, morality, and all of that, while on the surface seem to be simple and well agreed upon concepts, are in actuality quite the opposite. As you can imagine, having a feeling for what is right and wrong is rather simple. We all have that gut feeling we sometimes depend on. But attempting to actually define what, for example, morality is exactly, and from where it is derived from, is exponentially more difficult. Trying to understand these concepts we are all so familiar with is a lot harder than it seems, which is most probably why there are so many different theories that attempt to answer these questions. So it's my plan to explain all of these different theories of morality, then see if we can find which one Light Yagami might subscribe to. I believe it will be easier to understand these theories if I simply boil the topic of justice down to the subject of morality itself, and then transition to discussing justice after we've defined our terms. Essentially, there are two separate overarching camps in which all of our theories can be placed under, those being ethical objectivism and moral skepticism. Also, before I go too far, all of the definitions used are coming from Schaefer Landau's book, Whatever Happened to Good and Evil. It's a fairly airtight, concise argument for ethical objectivism being the true essence of morality, but that's neither here nor there for the topic of this video. All that's important for our purposes now are the definitions he provided us with. Ethical objectivism holds that morality, or what is right and wrong, is a universal fact that exists independent of human thought or consciousness. Think of it in the same way a biologist or historian or archaeologist would treat their area of study, whatever it may be. They are working to discover facts about life, about history, and about the past that exist independently of our existence or thinking. Is evolution, the random mutation of genes through natural selection, is that real? Regardless of what answer you might give in response to that question, the fact is that there is a right, correct answer. Ethical objectivists treat morality the same way, that when asked a moral question, such as is the death penalty wrong, or is murder bad, or is euthanasia a no-no, that there is a right, correct answer that exists independently of our opinions on the matter. It's fairly simple. In the other camp is moral skepticism. Unlike ethical objectivists, the skeptics hold that morality is not a fact independent of human thinking. To them, morality is mind-dependent, as in, what is right and wrong depends on what we think of the matter, or our beliefs. Now, under the umbrella of skepticism, there are a bunch of different theories that all take a somewhat similar approach with minor differences. Again, there are two main camps that our theories fall under. The first is moral nihilism, which holds that morality doesn't exist at all. To the moral nihilist, morality and good and evil it's simply a human invention, a social construct, something that benefits our social structures, but in reality doesn't really exist outside of our imaginations. Under moral nihilism exist two similar but slightly different theories: error theory and moral non-cognitism. How do you say that? Moral non-cognitivism. Okay. The specifics don't really matter much, as they essentially say the same thing, with the only real difference between them being that error theory holds that all moral beliefs are false, as morality is in and of itself a false concept, while moral non-cognitivism states that all moral statements are simply declarations of our own feelings, or commands, essentially. So they can be correct in that sense, that we're describing our own emotions. Regardless of all of that, moral nihilism is the belief that morality doesn't exist. There are a few more specific differences between these two, but they aren't necessarily important for our discussion, so I'll just suggest you look them up later if you're interested. Anyway, the second camp is ethical relativism, where within the theories of individual and cultural relativism reside. Ethical relativism is the belief that morality does exist, but that it's up to either, as individual relativism states, the beliefs of the individual person, or as cultural relativism states, the beliefs of the culture or society at large. Concerning individual relativism, if you sincerely believe it to be the case that something, let's say stealing, is morally wrong, then it is. You are the arbiter of what is right and wrong. However, you aren't some absolute authority, especially over others. What is right and wrong to someone may be different for someone else, and in that way, everyone's own views are equally based. Cultural relativism is this concept, but applied to societies as a whole. Society determines what is right and wrong, and no society or culture is better than one another. So now we have a fairly decent chart of all of our theories that Light Yagami could potentially subscribe to. It's really just going to be a process of elimination from here on out. Now, remember what Light said at the beginning of the video, that whoever was justice depended on whoever was victorious.
If Kira gets caught, then that makes him evil. But if he wins and rules the world, then I guess he's justice.
I think it's safe to say that this rules out the possibility of Light being any sort of moral objectivist pretty easily. Remember, moral objectivists believe that morality is a fact that exists independently of how we think, behave, or feel. It's just a reality of the universe we can either adhere to or not. Clearly, the idea that justice, the upholding of good and the punishment of evil, can be created, altered, and determined by human conflicts goes against this idea entirely. It's also pretty easy to dismiss Light as being any kind of moral nihilist. Moral nihilists believe that morality doesn't exist at all, and as anyone who is familiar at all with Death Note should know that Light Yagami definitely believes in good and evil. So the only option left is that Light Yagami must be a moral relativist of some sort. And now here's where things get a little tricky. Light, by using the Death Note to kill whom he deems deserves it, is breaking the law of his own country. So, he's not a cultural relativist, unless he admitted that what he was doing was evil, which certainly never happened, as the very suggestion that he was evil was enough to trigger him into murdering Lindell Taylor.
Kira, I've got a pretty good idea what your motivation might be, and I can guess what you hope to achieve. What you're doing right now is evil.
You think I'm evil?
I am justice! I protect the innocent and those who fear evil! I'm the one who will become the god of a new world that everyone desires! All those who oppose that god, they're the ones who truly...
Which subsequently gave away his location to L. But he's also not exactly an individual relativist because he's willing to deny himself of being justice and attribute it to someone else if he loses. So what does this mean? If he's not an individual or a cultural relativist, then what is he? Is his thinking just inconsistent? Well, I would like to present the presence of another, third option under relativism. An option that has unfortunately not been discussed in Schaefer-Landau's book. To definitively answer what light is, we have to take special attention to what it is exactly that allows light to become justice. That is, of course, the Death Note. According to his own words, light takes the lives of those he chooses because he has the power to do so. The Death Note is the tool that gives light the power to administer punishment to those he chooses. It gives him the power to do so, and with that power comes the authority to do so. But not only does the Death Note give him power over criminals, but also over governments and pre-existing authorities. Essentially, the Death Note grants Light the authority to cast judgment over the entire world. Because with the Death Note, he is the most powerful thing in the world. Before he acquired the notebook, the most powerful establishment was the Japanese government, which to Light's thinking was why they had the authority to administer punishment. But once he obtained the notebook, his power superseded that of any government, and so his word became law. Basically, to Light Yagami, might makes right. With the Death Note, he has all the might, which makes him the ultimate authority to determine what should be right and wrong. But if he were to lose to L, or Nier and the organizations created to catch Kira, and subsequently lose the Death Note and be imprisoned, then he would lose that might, which would make Nier and his gang right, as they would be the next most powerful force on Earth. Light's conceptions of morality is relative to the greatest authority. I don't have a fancy name for what this might be, or called, other than might makes right. Now, I suppose we could just leave it here and be done with it. I believe we've logically worked out Light's philosophy well enough, but we still have another question left to answer. That being, is Light Yagami right? Is he correct in his thinking? Were his actions really justified or not? A good first step in approaching all of these questions is to address Light's logic. Is it consistent with itself? If it is consistent and he doesn't act in any contradictory ways towards what he believes, then he is one step closer to being correct. And for the most part, he is fairly consistent. Before he acquired the notebook, he respected authority and kept well out of trouble. And if we are to take him seriously during the scene where he discusses justice, then it would follow that if he actually believed in what he said, then at the end of the show, when Light loses, we should see some sort of acceptance from him about that fact. Unfortunately, the ending doesn't provide much evidence of any sort to us in that regard. Light loses the Death Note, the game, and then his life. Spoilers, I guess. He does say a lot before he gets shot, but up until then, he was still trying to win. And after he does get shot, he doesn't stay to get apprehended, he runs away. Though, I think we can pull something out of this. I think it's somewhat significant that he does run away. I don't think Light thought he had a chance of winning at all at that point. I believe he knew his role as Kira was dead and that he had no chance of beating Nier. I think he was just trying to run away and live a bit longer. And if that's the case, then I suppose that Light really didn't accept the fact that Nier had won, and by Light's own reasoning, had the authority or right to capture and execute him. If Light had acted in a manner that was consistent with his logic, then he would have surrendered himself to Nier the moment he realized he had lost. He would have accepted that Nier had become justice. Another instance that illuminates some information towards Light's ideology is found in the first episode, immediately after using the Death Note for the first time.
Who am I to pass judgment on others? No, wait. Maybe I'm wrong. This is exactly what I've been thinking about lately. Even if it means sacrificing my own mind and soul, it's worth it. If I don't do it, then who will? That's just it. There's no one. In fact, I'm the only one who can.
The weight of taking people's lives initially has him emotionally wrought because he doesn't believe he has the right to. However, he's able to quickly rationalize his actions by saying that doing this kind of thing is good, even if it comes at the cost of his soul, because he's the only one who can. I think this might be the formulation of Light's beliefs in moral relativism based on authority. What I'm saying is, it's entirely possible that he invented this worldview to simply justify what he was doing, to justify killing people. If that's the case, then it's arguable that Light reached that conclusion because he was forced to. I say he was forced to because if he didn't, then he would have to regard what he was doing as wrong, which he initially felt it was. What I'm saying is, it's likely he bought into these ideas as a way of escaping being morally responsible for killing people. But for a moment, let's just say that Light was always consistent between his reasoning and his actions. Would his ideas of moral relativism based in authority been correct? Well, now that's a lot harder to answer. But a good place to start is by taking a look at the universe where the story of Death Note takes place in. We have to remember that this is a fictional setting, and so most likely the conclusions we draw from our analysis of it are probably not going to coincide with reality. So, what do we know of the world of Death Note? Well, for one, we know it's a pretty depressing place. Right off the bat, from the very first episode, Light Yagami and the audience are provided with all the information they need to know. In the universe of Death Note, there is no divine creator, or at least one that's interested or involved with its creation at all. There's also no heaven or hell for human souls to go to after death. All there is Mu, which translates to nothing. The only other realm outside of the human one is the Shinigami realm, but its existence is ultimately meaningless because none of the death gods actually fulfill their divine purpose. So they sit around in a state of the most unbearable boredom for an eternity because they find their work to be unentertaining. This is essentially a twofold confirmation that not only are human affairs ultimately meaningless, but the affairs of the divine are just as meaningless. There's something very intriguing about a fictional world having its own divinity and weird spirituality just to have it be functionless. It just hits harder for some reason, as if it's proof that the universe really has no purpose. I don't know. Though what's important about all of this information is that it's given directly to Light. Think about it. He was basically told that the universe has no higher purpose by a divine being. Consider that for a moment. If this is the truth of his world, and he has good reason to believe it, are his conceptions of justice, being relative to the greatest power, really that illogical? I think the whole point of Death Note is that it makes you, or at least with me this is the case, wonder about stuff we just kind of assume to understand or know. So I'm not going to answer this question. That would take more time than I cared to give at this point. I want you to perhaps think about it. But just as importantly, I want you to watch Death Note if you haven't already. It's absolutely fantastic from start to about midpoint, not to the end. The second half of the series does fall flat, which I have been thinking about making a video on for more than a year now, so maybe that'll be the topic of my next video very soon, I don't know. That would be kind of interesting.